Welcome. I'm Carl Frederick, and I will be interviewing individuals for Kenosha Voices, an oral history project of the Kenosha County Historical Society in conjunction with Kenosha Community Media. I have worked in newspapers for more than 40 years as an editor and a reporter. 38 and a half of those years were at the Kenosha News. I am also a member of the Kenosha County Historical Society Board. We hope you enjoy these programs. We're talking to Dan Stika, former employee of the Eaton Dynamatic Corporation. Hello, Dan.
Hello, Carl. How are you doing?
I'm doing fine, thank you. Now, you worked at the Dynamatic Corporation for a long period of time. When did you start?
I started there in June of 1961.
Okay, and
Long time
A
ago.
long time ago. And when did you retire?
I retired in 2002.
2002. And what did the Dynamatic Corporation do or make?
Dynamatic actually made electric drives for a number of industries. They made drives for stamping presses for the automobile industry, for stamping out doors and hoods and things of that nature. They developed drives for conveyor belts, for mines, gold mines, coal mines. They even made drives for the printing presses for the mints, for minting money. So I mean, they ran the whole 9 yards, as the saying goes.
Okay, and that company was founded in Kenosha, was it not?
That's correct. 1931 by the Winther brothers. Winther brothers. I'm sorry. Yes.
And how did you get hired for your job in '61?
Interesting story behind this. I had worked for Kresge's Dime Store as an assistant manager trainee, let's put it that way, and I really didn't like it, and I actually quit. And I'm around the house, and a friend of mine that worked at Dynamatic came by and said, "What are you doing out here?" Well, I says, "I'm in between jobs." He says, "No, you're not." He says, "Get over to the plant," he says, "mention my name," he says, "and start working," he says. You know, I mean, back in that day, you could go out and get a job, basically. So I did. I went there and
Filled out an application?
the rest is history, as the saying goes, right?
Okay, how did you get to work in the
How did I get to work?
to work then, you know?
Well, I lived within a 2-block radius, and I walked to work, which was kind of nice. Very convenient for me, very convenient.
Okay. And what was your first job?
First job was in the coil department, where we would wind coils for the drives themselves, the motor. This is what ran the current of the drives, and that was quite a job. You had forms that plates that you put together for each size plate. You had coils from this size to maybe 4 foot in diameter, and each one had plates that you'd fasten together. You run the coils on there, and you guide the copper wire going on this thing, and some of the coils would be adhered to with varnish. Others would be adhered to with plastic, which was quite interesting itself. And keeping the windings straight, keeping them straight from wall to wall, plate to plate. You know.
What kind of training did you have to start doing your job?
On-the-job training. You watch someone else working, and they would teach you what they did, and you just fell right into place.
And what department was that in?
It was a coil department. Coil
department
at that time, right? Yeah. And then another training program came into play. They had what was known as an electronics section of the shop, and it was a layout assembly section, and they were anticipating growth in the electronics industry. And what they did was put out a notice, anybody interested in going for a training program, will provide training for you. Well, I applied, and I went through training, and I'd like to just share a little bit of information. I ended up getting a diploma, which was kind of nice. Little feather in my cap. And this was me right here, receiving the diploma, which was very interesting. That was the shop foreman at that time, and there he was with the white shirt, and that was quite a deal. And there again, the training program consisted of going through with the engineers and the draftsmen, and you spent hours with each one, and they would teach you the fundamentals, and you'd go through, and it was a matter of wiring on a schematic as opposed to a wiring diagram. And this was very difficult because you had component parts in there, and you had to wire to the various component parts, and then after it was done, they made sure that it worked. If it didn't work, why you didn't complete the program.
So you moved to the electronics
the
department?
from the coil. Well, there again, I went into the electronics department. Then from that, we worked in a shop for a couple of years before the plant was built. The electronics department. Once that was built, then whoever was in electronics moved into that building. In the meantime, they had hired more employees for that purpose. And I ended up in the layout assembly area there, working off a bench, working on assemblies. In fact, one of the jobs I was able to work on was a control for the Juilliard School of Music. And this control itself operated 6 curtains. You had 3 on each side of the stage, it was a massive control. The panel itself was roughly 5 feet by 5 feet, and it was put into an enclosure, a cabinet itself with doors on there, and you had controls on the doors themselves that operated. You didn't have to open this up. Everything was operated from the external portion, and very fascinating to work with hand in hand with the engineer on that, engineer, draftsman, layout draftsman, and we'd worked with the component parts together, which was amazing. It just really fascinating.
And you stayed in the electronics department and then
exactly.
moved up, or
well, I stayed in there and I moved around in the department. I also ended up doing engraving. Each the component parts on the cabinet itself, you had push buttons, you had switches. Well, everything was labeled. Well, you end up, the things on there were engraved. You had on, off, you had numbers on there, and all this was done by an engraver. I ended up doing that, which was fascinating, and intricate work. Also making labels, making meters, like 0 to 100%, and labeling the meter, labeling that blank sheet, and putting all the numerals on there, putting all the digits, everything that was on it. It was very fascinating. Then from there, all these were advancements as far as pay grade. And then from there I went to incoming receiving inspection. All the parts that came into the electronics went through me at that time. I had to inspect everything that came in, tested everything, make sure everything that came in was per spec. And some of the things require some testing, checking ohms and stuff like that on the resistors, what have you. They're making sure they were all no defects in the component parts, because whatever came in had to work eventually on the device itself. And then from there, I went to a final inspection, which after the device was built, I then inspected those component parts and made sure everything was satisfactory to be shipped out. And then from there, I went to became the lead man within the department. And the lead man actually helped. I'm showing an employee of some of the fundamentals of the job that he's working on. I was capable of building the units myself, and by helping someone else out, you had helped them out conceivably building the product properly.
So you were a trainer for
exactly. Then from that, I ended up as a foreman. They developed a second shift, and which was interesting itself. We started out with, I think, 12 or 14 people, ended up with almost 30 people on the second shift. Well, that went along fine. And actually, what was happening though, the electronics wasn't as successful as they had anticipated. They then considered moving some of the devices out. They downsized the department itself. Eventually, then the second shift was removed. I then was, due to my seniority, I went back into I was on salary at that time. Went back into the union, and my seniority then carried me back into the shop. I then went back into the coil department, where I made my original start, which was fascinating. And then from there, I worked my way around again in there. We had an area there called where the coils were put into copper cans, and the coil was placed in the can, and then you had a copper cover that went on, and the cover was tack welded in place. And these were units that were sent out to they were water controlled units. They were waterproof, and because a lot of these units were submerged in hostile environments, and consequently that was the purpose of that. Then from there I ended up in mixing plastic. I was a plastic maker, because some of the coils were that we used to wind were instead of with the varnish, they were then coated with plastic, which was very interesting, which was sloppy in itself, but it was I mean, you could get over that. It wasn't about, you had to make sure that you were dressed properly. You didn't want to get any mess on your clothes. But
what was the safety equipment that you did have?
We had safety glasses for one thing. That was mandatory, and the attire you had. I mean, you had shop coats and things of this nature, vests, or not vests,
Aprons.
but apron of that nature, to keep yourself, clean and safe. And then from there, I moved out into the shop again from that coil department. These were all increases in pay. I mean, because my seniority then carried me through. I was able to apply for these jobs, and again, I then went on to the shop as a material handler. All right. This was supplying parts to other people working on the various areas of the plant. Then from there, I went to material supplier, which I would then assign these jobs to the material handler, and they would take the jobs out to the various bays that we had. We had bays, 1 through 10, I think is. Each bay had different types of materials that were stored, and people were building in those bays. Then from there, I ended up in the storeroom as a parts supplier, and I was in charge of all the parts that came into the light assembly area, not heavy, but into the light assembly area. And I spent my working career in that area. But throughout the time that I spent at Dynamatic, I participated in. We had cultural things going on. We had what was known as a Dynamatic Club that provided activities throughout the year. You had picnics and family picnics and bowling outings. We had a bowling league that was part of this Dynamatic Club. We used to bowl at the surf lanes, and I think we had 10 lanes, or all 10 lanes were occupied at that time, and very fascinating.
And
very
your own
fascinating.
league from Dynamatic Corporation.
Pardon me?
You had your own league just
We
for
had our own
Dynamatic.
league at the surf bowling. It was right. Well, then eventually that league started waning as far as men. That we were getting women involved in. Well, then some of the wives didn't like the fact that women were on their teams, so they constantly, these guys left, and the league itself shifted, and we ended up with from 10 teams, we ended up down to 5, and eventually it was disbanded because we couldn't get enough people together. But we disbanded in 1984, and that year, the team I was on took first place, which was kind of nice, Wow.
Were there any particular difficulties in any of these jobs that you had? You
There
mentioned the
were
plastics being
There were
sloppy.
challenges. There were challenges to all these jobs, right? Making sure that you had the right ingredients for one thing. You could make a mistake and not have the right ingredients. Winding the coils, you had to make sure that you didn't have any nicks in these coils. I mean, you didn't want any shorts within a coil itself. Everything was everything. You had a it was your mind had it could play tricks on you. But you had to make sure you kept focused on what job you were doing, and I enjoyed every aspect of the jobs that I had over there.
What was the relationship between the union and the management while you were there?
It was good. I think it was. I mean, you always have difficulties. There's no problem there, but certain employees provide more difficulties than others, and but all in all, it was a very favorable condition.
They liked their jobs. They were
Exactly.
proud of
Well,
it.
there again, now people stayed for forever. I mean, you didn't move from job to job there. Well, like myself, I was there over 40 years, and that's a long time. But the majority of people that were there stayed a long time. And that says something then for the company itself.
And they were proud of the work that they did.
Exactly, right, yeah.
Over the course of your employment, what changes had you seen in how the company was affected, either by world events or technology changes?
Well, technology changes were prevalent. I mean, with the electronics itself, when that first came into play, we started out with this layout assembly that I had a training program for. We started with the schematic wiring component parts, eventually to a block diagram, where you actually told you where these wires were going to, from this relay to this switch. And it was all laid out for you, which was very nice, very convenient. But that was a major innovation in itself.
Any other things that caused changes to your job in the electronics department or any other place that you were?
The loss of jobs was created. We allowed, the company itself allowed foreign industry to come in and checking out things that we had made. Well, we used to make a press drive control that would operate these press drives for various automotive factories. Well, eventually our press drive control orders depleted. And as it turned out, these other companies were taking over, and they would just change certain aspects of that control, made it into their own. Consequently, we lost out on that, and actually that was then basically the demise of the electronics itself.
And in the demise of the electronics department, what did that mean for the company as a whole?
Well, the company, you lost employment, you lost employees at that plant. What they did then, they converted a lot of these jobs that were left, they went elsewhere. They had the Eaton Corporation at that time had other plants, and they then put these parts of the electronics department into that plant. So it was a loss for us and a gain for them down there.
Okay, what was the best part of working at Dynamatic?
Being able to move around, being able to go from job to job. An interesting point too. During the working time there, the company developed what was known as a task force, and they had employees from supervision, from salary, from hourly salary, engineering, all aspects of the company itself. And we would meet on a weekly basis. And I was selected from out of shop. I felt honored, But I was asked what I thought could better the relationship between what was going on within the plant itself, with the employees. I suggested a newsletter. And I remember the human resources manager, nah, that won't work. Because we tried that once before, and it just didn't work out. I said let's try it again. Maybe a different concept, a different way of doing things, And it still won't work. Well, the division manager He's, some of these things stand out. They're very vivid in my mind, you know. But he said, let's follow Dan's idea here, and let's give it a try. So I was then put on this as a coordinator. I started the newsletter as a coordinator, and I was with several other people, maybe half a dozen other people. We got together and we pooled our thoughts together and came up with a newsletter. And I'm glad you asked. If I can, wait. The newsletter itself, eventually then I became the editor. After, we did this for like 5 years. And this is what the newsletter was called the Driveline. And throughout the course of the years that I ran this, we had won numerous awards. And I have to share that we Best Employee article, which was going to, now these newsletters then were sent to Eaton Corporation itself, and in Cleveland. Mm-hmm. And you had other companies, other factories supplying newsletters also, and that was quite a feather in my cap as far as getting the honorable mention or awards for these things, which was kind of nice. And in essence, it provided a good cultural benefit for the employees themselves.
What was the worst part of your job, or jobs, any of them that may have had a bad part to it?
Worst part of my job, it wasn't job related, but I got bit by a bee. Oh. And the foreman ended up taking me to the St. Catherine's Hospital.
Interesting.
I survived, but that was the worst part of my employment there. I mean, each job had its positives and negatives, and you overcame these things. If it was not difficult, but you know, I don't know if I care for this. Mind over matter again. You know, I enjoyed working there. I enjoyed the pay. I enjoyed everything that I did with the plant itself. Otherwise, I wouldn't have stayed there.
And how did you feel when the plant closed?
Well, in that regard, I was already ready to retire, and it was a downer. I mean, no question about it. I mean, a lot of people, a lot of lives were being affected by this, and that was probably a sad part of the whole term of working at the plant.
Okay. How about others? Have you ever talked to anybody about how they
I
felt?
had talked, and it was basically the same feeling. A lot of these people then went out and got other jobs, fortunately, because once again they were able to, and they had skills that provided that enough for them to go on and get their jobs.
Do you miss it today, or what part do you miss?
Yeah, stop and think about it. I miss it. Well, putting all those years into a place, why it has to pry on your mind. You know, this was fun. I enjoyed this. You know, I enjoyed going to work, and I enjoyed the camaraderie there. You know, and once again, moving around from job to job, which was kind of nice. I didn't just stay on one position. When opportunity arose, I then took advantage of it and pursued it, and was able to succeed.
Are there any other stories that you'd like to share that maybe aren't related to the question specifically?
I really can't recall anything of that nature. I mean, I enjoyed what I did, and the ability to be part of a going company at that time, and the product itself was fascinating. And
thank you, Dan.
Thank you very much. Sorry, I can't add any more to that, but that's.